Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about learning Japanese in Japanese. Primarily, learning Japanese vocabulary with Japanese definitions instead of English definitions. Now, don't run away, because the way I teach it, you can do this even from quite an early stage, with very little difficulty or worry. The reason a lot of people are afraid of this is because of the way it's usually put forward and recommended. Currently, there are essentially two schools of thought. One that assumes that we're going to just be using English definitions for Japanese words forever. And this becomes more and more inefficient as we go along. Those who don't take this view usually take an extreme version of the opposite view, which is that all of a sudden, one day, we make the so-called monolingual shift, in which we suddenly, having defined everything in English, don't use English ever again. So if we see a word we don't know, we have to look it up in Japanese. And if the Japanese definition contains 3 more words that we don't know, we have to look all those up in Japanese. And those definitions may each contain some words that we don't know. And these so-called dictionary dives can end up involving 50 words or more. Now, if you want to do that, if that's the way your mind works, if you like that sort of thing, go ahead and do it, and that's fine. My view of this is not only that it's very off-putting for a lot of people, but it's also extremely time-consuming, and that time would be much better spent in real immersion, actually consuming Japanese material. So how do we go about it? And is it really true that we can do it from a very early stage? Yes, it is, and I'm going to teach you 3 basic tricks for doing it from an early stage, and then we're going to look at some slightly more advanced techniques. Trick number 1. Use a word you already know. Now, you may say, well, I'm a beginner, I don't know any words yet much. Even so, you can probably start doing this from pretty early on. For example, suppose you know the word demo, meaning but, and you encounter the words kedo or keredo, also meaning but. You can just put keredo on the front of your Anki card, and on the back you put demo, and there you are. You have your very first Japanese to Japanese definition. And let's remember that the way we use Anki, it's not there to teach us Japanese. It's there to pin words in place between encounters in real Japanese, that's to say in our anime or whatever Japanese material we're consuming. So we don't need our definitions to be terribly detailed and precise. We need them to remind us what the words mean, so that we don't lose track of them between real exposures. Trick number 2 is use an antonym. An antonym is a word that means the reverse of another word. The word for antonym in Japanese is taigigo, and we should learn that word because we're going to use it in our Anki quite a lot. So, if we know the word atsui, meaning hot, and we're learning the word samui, meaning cold, our definition for samui can be atsui no taigigo. We can also simply use tai, which is a dictionary-style abbreviation often used in real Japanese dictionaries for Japanese people. So we can say samui, and the definition would just be tai atsui. And this is also useful because tai in this way is often used for things which aren't strictly antonyms, but the corresponding somewhat opposite conception. So we can put things like otou-san, tai, okaa-san. Otou-san is the opposite or the counterpart of okaa-san. So if I know lots and lots of words where we can find true antonyms, and if you're happy using these counterpart words with Tai, then you've got a lot more words that from a very early stage you can define in Japanese in your Anki. Now, the next trick, the third trick, is even easier than the other two, and that is use a katakana word. In many cases, there is a word in common use in Japanese from English, or perhaps another language that you know, but very often English, in katakana that means the same thing. Now you already know that word from English, so you can use that in your definition. For example, ureshii means happy, and the word happy in Japanese is very common, so you can put as your definition of ureshii, happy. On a slightly more advanced level, you might have the word taisho, which means symmetry, and you can put as the definition of that word symmetry, which is a Japanese word. And no, this isn't cheating at all. The Sanseido dictionary, which is a Japanese to Japanese dictionary for Japanese people, uses symmetry as one of the definitions of taisho. It isn't cheating at all because it actually serves a very good purpose. Because we can't just put any English word into katakana and call it a Japanese word. Some English words have been adopted as loanwords into Japanese. So when we define a word that way, we're killing two birds with one stone. We are giving ourselves a definition of the word we're learning, and we're also teaching ourselves the fact that that katakana word is a real Japanese word available for use. Obviously, you mustn't make up katakana words of your own. You must only use ones that really exist in Japanese. So by these methods, we begin to get our feet into the water of Japanese definitions. We're starting to define some of our words in Japanese. When we want to start going further, what do we do for our next steps? Well, one of the best things to do at a slightly more advanced stage is when we find a new word, look it up in the online Sanseido dictionary. I'm going to give you the link below. There are several online Japanese dictionaries, but the Sanseido one gives very concise definitions, and that's what we want. Firstly, because we're going to be more likely to understand them when we're not super advanced, and secondly, because, as we said before, we're really only trying to pin words in place. We don't want half-page definitions of words in our Anki, not even in English, and certainly not in Japanese. So you look up the definition in the Sanseido online dictionary, and if you can understand it, you put that into your Anki. If you can't understand it, can you cut it down to something you can understand? Can you rephrase it? Can you make a little definition of your own in Japanese? If you can do that. And another thing you can do is use a sample sentence. There are lots of ways of getting sample sentences in both Japanese and English for words. Jisho, the Japanese to English dictionary, will give you sample sentences for most words, and then there are various Japanese services like Weblio, and I'll give you links for some of those below. If you get a simple sentence from which you will know your word, you can put that on the back instead of an English definition. And if you're worried that you won't understand your sentences or definitions at a later stage, a very simple trick you can do is to create another field in your Anki, but don't put it on the front or the back of the card. Just leave it created, and you can enter into that the English definition. Now, if you do that, you won't see it on the front or the back of your Anki, but if you're stuck, you can hit the edit button on your Anki, and then you'll see all the fields, including your emergency help field. Now, another important tip that you may or may not want to use, but that I have found extremely helpful, is to use audio. To do this, you have to install an add-on called Awesome TTS on your Anki. Now, the thing to know here is that this currently does not work with the latest Anki. The latest Anki is Anki 2.1, and the last Anki that awesome TTS works for is Anki 2.0. So install Anki 2.0. If you already have 2.1, uninstall it and install 2.0. And then get the awesome TTS add-on. Once you have that, you can get your sample sentences or your definitions spoken in Japanese by a bot. Now, some people argue against this. They say the bots aren't quite natural. Well, they're a lot more natural than they used to be. Some of them are almost as natural as I am. I know that's not saying too much, but it's not bad. The important thing to remember, though, is that you won't be getting the majority of your Japanese audio from these bots. Most of the Japanese audio you ever hear, if you're using our immersion methods, will be from your own audio immersion spoken by native Japanese speakers. A few bots are not going to destroy your Japanese, but they are going to help it. So don't worry too much about the fine china, the super delicate Japanese school of thought. There are numerous advantages to audio. For example, if you're using Katakana definitions, one of the mistakes beginners make is to pronounce Katakana English loanwords as if they were English words. The bots will pronounce them properly as Katakana words, so you'll hear them each time the way they're really supposed to be pronounced. Another important point about audio is that if you're like me, you can do your Anki primarily by audio. You'll look at the kanji on the front, and then I don't look at the card again. I just listen to it. I hear the pronunciation, I hear the definition, and if I'm happy with that, I move on without looking at the back of the card at all. Now, if you do it that way, you can, if you want to, put some notes or even an English definition on the back of the card. You won't be seeing it unless you're having a problem remembering. So these are all ways that you can start introducing Japanese to Japanese into your Anki. And what you're going to find is that you get more and more Japanese as you go along. You don't have to do this macho thing of leaping into Japanese and never touching English again. You can do it in a measured, pragmatic way that doesn't waste vast amounts of time, but does help you to transition from English definitions to Japanese definitions naturally over time. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. You'll see my red Kokeshi patrons in the information section below along with those vital links. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. Korekara mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Class dismissed.